In February 2008, the body of 38-year-old trooper Lila Porter was discovered in her Hanover, New Hampshire home. The shocking discovery unraveled a secret affair between her and fellow state trooper Alan Hayes, leading to a devastating tragedy. At 6:45 a.m., Lila was found dead in her kitchen by her teenage daughter, Emily, lying in a pool of blood with a single gunshot wound to her chest. Her service-issued weapon was staged near her hand to suggest suicide. Emily, trembling with shock, called 911. When first responders arrived, they quickly realized the scene was suspicious, with Detective Garrett Lynch leading the investigation. Lila Porter was known for her unwavering dedication to her job as a state trooper. She was equally devoted to her daughter Emily, raising her as a single mother after a painful divorce. While admired professionally, Lila's private life told a different story. The loneliness of her divorce led her to seek companionship. In Alan Hayes, a married fellow trooper, she found a confidant. To her colleagues, Lila seemed strong and composed, but emails and texts would later reveal her vulnerable side, showing a woman torn between her sense of morality and her desire for love. Alan Hayes, a senior trooper, was known for his charisma and family man image. However, behind closed doors, Alan confided in Lila about his struggles with his wife, Deborah. Their friendship quickly turned into an affair. While Lila yearned for Alan to leave his wife and build a future with her, Alan grew increasingly evasive. The affair became a source of tension and manipulation as Lila pressured Alan and Alan deflected, torn between his double life. Their relationship grew toxic, with arguments escalating to threats of exposure. The affair set the stage for the tragedy that would unfold. Detective Garrett Lynch and his team faced an uphill battle in unraveling the truth. The crime scene was initially staged to resemble a suicide, but inconsistencies began to emerge. The lack of gunpowder residue on Lila's hands, the unusual angle of the gunshot, and the pristine positioning of the firearm hinted at foul play. Lila's phone was examined, revealing heated exchanges with Alan Hayes. These messages painted a picture of a relationship spiraling out of control, with threats of exposure and emotional manipulation. A neighbor recalled seeing a car resembling Alan's in the area the night before Lila's death, while Emily's fragmented memories added further weight to the suspicion. Forensic evidence became crucial as investigators sought to match the trajectory of the bullet and identify the weapon used. Alan Hayes began to crack under scrutiny. Initially cooperative, his demeanor shifted as the investigation progressed. At work, he became erratic, snapping at colleagues and avoiding routine tasks. His behavior drew whispers among the department, with some speculating about his connection to Lila's murder. Interviews with Alan revealed inconsistencies in his timeline. He claimed to have been on duty during the time of Lila's death, but GPS data from his patrol car suggested otherwise. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed a vehicle matching his in proximity to Lila's home, further tightening the noose around him. Alan's crumbling facade highlighted a man desperate to hide a damning truth. The investigation reached a critical juncture when detectives searched Alan's car and home. Inside his vehicle, they discovered a jacket with gunpowder residue. Despite Alan's claims that the jacket hadn't been worn in weeks, forensic testing contradicted him. The turning point came when ballistic analysis confirmed that the bullet used to kill Lila matched Alan's service weapon. This gun had been reported lost by Alan a week before the murder. Surveillance footage further revealed a suspicious gap in Alan's movements during the time frame of Lila's death. This evidence irreparably shattered his alibi and painted a picture of premeditated murder. As the investigation deepened, Alan Hayes' motive became the linchpin of the case. Investigators unearthed years of financial instability masked by a facade of respectability. Alan had secretly accumulated massive debts through reckless spending and poor investments, putting his career and personal life at risk. The affair with Lila Porter added another layer of complexity. Initially, their relationship had been a thrilling escape for Alan, but Lila's growing demands for transparency and commitment turned their bond into a powder keg. Lila had begun pressuring Alan to leave his wife Deborah and had threatened to expose their relationship if he didn't. For Alan, this threat posed catastrophic consequences: public humiliation, career ruin, and the potential loss of Deborah's substantial inheritance, which had been his financial lifeline. Emails and text messages between Lila and Alan revealed the depth of the conflict. Lila's words reflected her frustration and determination, while Alan's responses were increasingly dismissive and evasive. Investigators theorized theorized that Alan viewed Lila's silence as the only way to protect his reputation and his marriage, leading him to plan her murder with chilling precision. As Alan's motive came to light, investigators briefly turned their attention to his wife, Deborah. Could a scorned spouse have taken matters into her own hands upon discovering the affair? Witness reports of a car matching Deborah's in the vicinity of Lila's home added fuel to this theory. Deborah's initial shock and devastation when confronted by the affair seemed genuine, but detectives scrutinized her behavior and alibi. Phone records, credit card transactions, and witness testimonies eventually cleared her of any involvement. She was at home with her children on the night of the murder, with multiple corroborating accounts. This phase of the investigation, however, took an emotional toll on Deborah. The insinuation that she might have been capable of murder further compounded the betrayal she felt. Her eventual exoneration not only strengthened her resolve to seek justice for Lila, but also deepened her anger toward Alan, who had brought such turmoil into her life. The case against Alan Hayes solidified with each piece of evidence uncovered. Ballistic tests conclusively matched the bullet found at the crime scene to Alan's service weapon, which he had reported missing just days before Lila's death. Forensic analysis revealed traces of gunpowder residue on a jacket found in Alan's car, despite his insistence that he hadn't worn it in weeks. Witnesses began to come forward, piecing together Alan's movements on the night of the murder. A gas station attendant identified his vehicle on security footage, placing him near Lila's neighborhood. Neighbors recalled seeing a man fitting his description near the scene, although none could definitively identify him. A voicemail left by Lila on a friend's phone just hours before her death added emotional weight to the evidence. In the message, she expressed fear and mentioned Alan's name explicitly, saying she felt she was being followed. This recording became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case, underscoring Alan's desperation to silence Lila permanently. Alan Hayes' arrest marked a dramatic turning point in the case. Detectives meticulously planned the operation to avoid unnecessary conflict, arriving at his suburban home early in the morning. Deborah answered the door, visibly shaken as officers informed her of their intentions. Alan, disheveled and defiant, initially denied any wrongdoing as he was handcuffed in front of his children. The arrest sent shockwaves through the police department, where Alan had been considered a model officer. Colleagues who once revered him were left grappling with the betrayal and tarnished reputation he brought to their profession. As news of the arrest spread, the community reacted with disbelief and outrage. Alan's fall from grace became the subject of intense media scrutiny, with journalists delving into his life and unraveling the layers of deception he had maintained for years. The months leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of intense legal strategy, careful planning, and emotional stress for both the prosecution and the defense. Each side was meticulous in preparing their case, knowing that every detail could sway the jury's opinion. For the prosecution, the focus was on establishing a clear and undeniable narrative. They meticulously combed through all of Alan Hayes' past interactions with Lila Porter, piecing together a timeline of escalating conflict. They even enlisted a team of forensic experts to explain in minute detail how the murder weapon, Alan's service pistol, was linked to the crime. The team worked closely with detectives who had investigated the case, rehearsing their testimonies and refining their approach to ensure every piece of evidence was presented with precision. Key to their case was the financial investigation. Alan had been paying a private investigator, an ominous sign that he was actively keeping tabs on Lila, potentially in an attempt to control or monitor her actions. The prosecution prepared to highlight this as clear evidence of premeditation. Every possible angle was covered, including the psychological profile of Alan. Expert psychologists were brought in to discuss the nature of abusive relationships and how controlling behavior often escalates to violence. The defense, on the other hand, was grappling with mounting evidence that painted their client as a murderer. Their goal was to find any small chink in the prosecution's armor. They hired a prominent criminal defense lawyer, hoping to exploit any inconsistencies in the police investigation or the handling of evidence. They planned to focus on Alan's psychological state, painting him as a man under immense pressure from his career and a broken marriage. Their argument was that Alan was not a cold-blooded murderer, but rather a man pushed to his breaking point by a combination of personal and professional stress. As trial preparation progressed, both sides began conducting mock trials. This allowed them to gauge the effectiveness of their arguments and prepare for the inevitable emotional challenges in the courtroom. Both teams focused heavily on jury selection, knowing that the right mix of jurors could be crucial for the outcome. When the trial finally began, it was nothing short of a spectacle. The courtroom was packed, and the atmosphere was charged with emotion. Lila's family, still grieving the sudden loss of their loved one, sat in the front row, while Alan's family, including his wife Deborah and children, sat nervously in the back. One of the most moving moments of the trial came during Emily Porter's testimony. The young girl, no more than 16 years old, bravely took the stand and told the jury about the emotional turmoil she had experienced. She recalled overhearing fights between her mother and Alan, describing the fear and confusion that permeated their home. The jury watched intently as she described how her mother's relationship with Alan had slowly spiraled into something toxic and threatening. Emily's testimony about discovering her mother's body was particularly heart-wrenching. She described walking into the house that fateful morning to find her mother lying lifeless, a moment that still haunted her. Her voice trembled as she explained the traumatic impact this event had on her, and her raw emotion left an indelible mark on everyone in the courtroom. Deborah Hayes also testified, her voice heavy with sorrow. She painted a picture of her husband as a man who, on the surface, appeared caring but harbored deep flaws. She spoke about the mounting pressure in their marriage, their arguments, and the chilling realization that her husband was capable of such violence. Deborah's testimony was one of conflicting emotions: love, betrayal, and disbelief. She struggled to reconcile the man she once loved with the one standing accused of murder. The prosecution played Lila's final voicemail, recorded just hours before her death. In it, Lila's voice wavered with fear as she described an argument she had with Alan, mentioning his threats. Her words, "I don't know if I can get out of this," were gut-wrenching, a haunting reminder of the terror Lila felt in her final hours. Expert testimony also played a pivotal role. A forensic pathologist explained how the gunshot wound had been inflicted from close range, supporting the argument that Lila had been deliberately targeted. In addition, a forensic psychologist took the stand, discussing the psychological toll that abusive relationships take on victims, painting a picture of Lila as a woman who had been trapped by her abuser's manipulation and control. As the trial continued, the defense found themselves in an increasingly difficult position. Their initial strategy of painting Alan Hayes as a victim of overwhelming stress and personal turmoil did not resonate with the jury. The prosecution's case had been so strong, supported by both hard evidence and emotional testimony, that the defense began to struggle to find any foothold to challenge the overwhelming narrative that Alan had committed the murder with premeditation. The defense's first major hurdle was Alan himself. His behavior in court was cold and distant, giving little to no emotional response to the heartbreaking testimonies presented by the prosecution. This created a stark contrast to the emotional appeal of Lila's family, particularly Emily Porter, whose testimony had left a lasting impact. Alan's lack of visible remorse or empathy made it difficult for the defense to frame him as a man pushed to the edge by stress. Instead, his stoic demeanor only reinforced the prosecution's portrayal of him as a calculating and unfeeling individual. Trying to salvage their case, the defense focused on discrediting the prosecution's key pieces of evidence. They questioned the validity of forensic evidence, attempting to create doubt about the handling and preservation of the murder weapon. They argued that the gunshot could have been accidental, or even that another person could have been involved. However, this tactic proved to be ineffective, as they could not present any credible alternative suspects or physical evidence that could cast reasonable doubt. The defense also turned to Alan's psychological state, suggesting that he had been emotionally distraught due to the collapse of his marriage and the pressure from his career. They argued that, in a fit of temporary insanity, Alan might have acted out of character and killed Lila without the intent to do so. However, this argument was weak and failed to convince the jury. The prosecution's evidence suggested a clear pattern of manipulation, control, and premeditation, leaving little room for the defense to argue that Alan's actions had been the result of a temporary lapse in judgment. At the same time, the defense worked to discredit Emily Porter's testimony. They insinuated that Emily's emotions and grief clouded her judgment, and that her account of overhearing her mother and Alan's arguments could not be fully trusted. However, this line of attack backfired, as the jury found Emily's testimony to be sincere and compelling. Her courage in speaking out about the abuse her mother endured resonated deeply with the jury. As the days passed and the defense failed to produce a strong counter-narrative, it became apparent that their efforts were increasingly futile. Their struggle to discredit the prosecution's case only seemed to highlight the unassailable nature of the evidence presented against Allen. After weeks of intense courtroom drama, the jury finally began deliberating. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as everyone awaited the moment of truth. Lila's family, while hoping for justice, could not escape the deep sadness of knowing that nothing would bring their beloved daughter and sister back. Allen's family, sitting at the back of the courtroom, anxiously awaited the jury's decision, their faces a mixture of hope and disbelief. The jury deliberated for only 2 days. The evidence was clear and compelling, and it didn't take long for them to reach a verdict. When the jury returned to the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. The judge called the court to order, and the room fell silent. The foreman stood and delivered the verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. The weight of the decision hit like a thunderclap, reverberating throughout the room. Allen's face remained impassive, but inside, he likely felt the full weight of his actions. His years of carefully crafted respectability and his career as an officer had now been obliterated by his own violent choices. Lila's family, though relieved by the guilty verdict, felt no real joy. Justice had been served, but it would never bring back their loved one. Emily, who had shown so much courage throughout the trial, felt a mix of grief and relief. She had worked tirelessly to ensure her mother's story was heard, and now it felt like a small victory in an otherwise tragic story. For Deborah Hayes, the verdict was a final brutal blow. Not only had she lost her husband, but she had also lost the life they once had together. Deborah sat quietly, her head in her hands, as she grappled with the reality of the situation. Her husband was not only a murderer, but her own history with him had been a lie. His facade had crumbled. The aftermath of the trial was devastating for everyone involved. Lila's family, while relieved that justice had been served with Allen's conviction, was left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. Although they could finally take comfort in the fact that he would be punished for his crime, the void left by Lila's death was something they would never fully overcome. Emily in particular struggled with a deep mix of grief and survivor's guilt. Despite the conviction, she found it hard to reconcile the person she had known her whole life with the man who had murdered her mother. As time passed, she found solace in channeling her pain into advocacy. She became an outspoken advocate for victims of domestic violence, tirelessly working to ensure her mother's death was not in vain. Emily's courage to speak publicly about her mother's abuse and the impact of her loss resonated with many people, inspiring others to speak out about their own experiences and seek help. For Deborah Hayes, the aftermath was equally difficult. While she had lost her husband and the life they had built together, she had also been forced to confront the painful reality that Allen was capable of such brutality. She was forced to reckon with the deep betrayal and the emotional toll it had taken on her family. Deborah sought therapy to help her process the complex emotions she was facing. She also decided to relocate, hoping that a change of scenery would provide her and her children with a fresh start and the chance to rebuild their lives in peace, away from the constant media attention. Despite the heartache, Deborah tried to focus on healing and creating a new sense of normalcy for her children. As for Allen Hayes, his life was permanently altered. The man who had once been a respected officer in the community now found himself facing the consequences of his actions in prison. The conviction meant that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, without the possibility of parole. His life as he had known it was over. His career, his reputation, and his freedom were all taken from him in an instant. Behind bars, Allen was forced to confront the enormity of his crime, but the isolation and shame he felt were likely to be even more unbearable than the punishment itself. His life was no longer defined by respect or authority. Instead, he had become a symbol of betrayal and violence, forever marked by the murder of his wife. The wider community was also deeply impacted by Allen's crime. The news that a trusted police officer had committed such a heinous act left many people feeling shaken and disillusioned. The public's trust in the police was eroded, and there was a significant outcry regarding how such a crime could have occurred under the watch of law enforcement. In response to the scandal, the police department reassessed its protocols, particularly regarding the mental health and emotional well-being of its officers. There was a heightened awareness of the pressures and challenges that law enforcement professionals face, and the department began to implement measures to support officers better, hoping to prevent future tragedies. The case also sparked a broader conversation about domestic violence, with many people becoming more aware of the signs of abuse and the importance of recognizing unhealthy relationships before it's too late. the media continued to cover the case extensively, focusing on the shocking nature of Alan's crime and the emotional toll it had taken on everyone involved. The media's coverage was at times invasive, focusing on personal details that further heightened the public scrutiny of the family's grief. But it also gave a platform to those advocating for changes in how domestic violence cases were handled and brought attention to the importance of early intervention. As the story continued to unfold in the media, the case remained in the public eye, and the effects of the trial were felt by the entire community. People who had known Alan before the murder were left in disbelief, struggling to understand how the man they had respected and trusted could be capable of such an atrocity. For many, the case became a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers that can lie behind closed doors, reminding everyone that violence can sometimes be the most unexpected. We'd like to thank everyone for watching this video and following the journey of this deeply emotional case. If you found this video insightful and engaging, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more detailed case breakdowns and in-depth analyses. We strive to bring you stories that matter, stories that explore the complexities of human nature and the consequences of our actions. And of course, we encourage you to hit the notification bell so you never miss any of our future content. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you believe the defense stood a chance, or was the evidence so overwhelming that there was no other option but for the jury to convict? What aspects of the case stood out to you the most? Do you feel that Alan's sentence was fair? Were there any moments in the trial or the investigation that shocked you? We encourage you to leave your thoughts in the comments below and share your perspective with us. Finally, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to a trusted professional or organization for support. There are resources available to help you, and you do not have to go through it alone. Thank you again for watching, and we look forward to bringing you more powerful stories in the future. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.